In PHP, functions can accept parameters. These are special variables that allow you to pass information into a function so it can perform specific tasks. A function can have 0, 1, or multiple parameters. When you define more than one parameter, they are separated by commas within the parentheses of the function declaration. For example, if a function needs both a name and an age, you can declare it like this: function greet, name, age. Here, both name and age act as parameters. When you call a function, you must provide the same number of arguments as the parameters declared. If the function expects 2 parameters but receives only 1 argument, PHP will raise an error because the missing argument leaves the function incomplete. This ensures that your code runs correctly and that every parameter inside the function has a value to work with. Parameters are always declared after the function name, inside parentheses, just like normal variable declarations, but without assigning them values. The values are assigned later when the function is called. This structure allows developers to create dynamic and reusable code, where the same function can work with different inputs each time it is executed. In earlier versions of PHP, particularly before PHP 8.0, trailing commas in parameter lists were not supported. A trailing comma means an extra comma placed after the last parameter in the list. For example, writing function test, A, B, was not allowed in PHP 7.0 and would cause a syntax error. However, from PHP 8.0 onwards, this limitation was removed. Now trailing commas are permitted, making it easier for developers to format their code, especially when defining functions, with many parameters or when organizing code across multiple lines. This small but powerful update in PHP 8.0 improved code readability and reduced the chances of syntax errors when editing long parameter lists. It also helps maintain cleaner version control, since adding or removing parameters no longer requires adjusting commas manually. PHP function parameters are a key part of writing flexible and organized code. They allow data to flow into functions, helping developers reuse the same block of code for multiple tasks. Whether you're passing one value or several, using parameters correctly ensures your PHP functions run smoothly and efficiently. Let's understand the concept of function parameters with the help of this simple example. In this PHP program, a function named multiply is defined. Inside the parentheses of the function, you can see a single parameter, value. This means that the function is designed to receive one input whenever it is called. Parameters like value act as placeholders. They temporarily store the data that you pass into the function. Now, look at the body of the function. Inside the curly braces yotu, the parameter value is used in an operation. The line value, chart value, 20, means that whatever number is passed to the function will be multiplied by 20. After performing the calculation, the return statement sends the result back to wherever the function was called from. This is what allows the function to produce an output that can be used later in the program. Below the function definition, you'll find the statement, retvol, multiply 10. Here, the function multiply is being called and the argument 10 is passed to it. This value replaces the parameter value inside the function. So, when the code runs, value becomes 10. The function then multiplies 10 by 20, resulting in 200, and returns that value to the variable retvol. Finally, the last line of the program, print, return value is retvoln, displays the result on the screen. It prints, return value is 200. The RN at the end adds a new line after the output, which helps keep the terminal output clean and readable. This simple example demonstrates how parameters work in PHP functions. You can think of parameters as input channels that allow data to flow into a function. The real strength of parameters becomes clear when you want to reuse the same function multiple times with different values. For instance, calling multiply 5 would return 100 and multiply 15 would return 300, all using the same function definition. This makes your code modular, efficient, and easier to manage. Key takeaways. Function parameters allow you to pass values into a function for processing. You can define one or more parameters inside parentheses, separated by commas. Parameters act as variables that store the values passed when the function is called. The return keyword sends the processed result back to the main program. Functions with parameters help reduce repetition and make your PHP code cleaner and more flexible. Now let's understand how the program actually works when it runs, and why the output shows return value is 200. When the PHP interpreter executes this script, it starts reading from the top. It first sees the function definition, function multiply, value, but at this point, the function is not yet executed. It is simply defined, meaning PHP now knows that a function named multiply exists, and it will perform certain operations when called. The actual execution begins when the line retval ord multiplied or 10 is reached. Here the function multiply is called, and the value 10 is passed as an argument. This value is received by the parameter value inside the function. Now, inside the function body, the line value as value 20 takes the input 10 and multiplies it by 20. This gives us 200. The function then uses the return statement to send this value back to the place where the function was called. The returned result, 200, is stored in the variable retval. So now, retval holds the value 200, which represents the final computed result of the multiplication operation. The next line, print return value is retvaln, prints this result to the screen. As a result, the output displayed is return value is 200. This output confirms that the function successfully took the input value, performed the operation inside its body, and then returned the result to the main program for display. In PHP, every piece of data that we work with falls under a specific category known as a data type. A data type defines the nature of the value stored in a variable. For example, whether it's a number, a string of text, a true or false value, or even a collection of multiple values. Understanding variable types is essential because it helps PHP decide how to process and store data correctly in memory. Data types also determine what kind of operations you can perform on a variable. For instance, you can add or subtract integers and doubles, but you cannot add a string directly to a Boolean. Each type has its own specific behavior and usage in programming. There are 8 primary data types in PHP, but let's begin by understanding the first few mentioned here. Integers, doubles, and Booleans. Integers are whole numbers without any fractional or decimal part. These can be either positive or negative numbers, such as 4195, 200, or 0. In PHP, integers are often used when you need to count, loop through a range of numbers, or perform mathematical calculations that don't require decimal precision. For example, you might write age side 25, quantity or 100. Here, both age and quantity store whole numbers, so they are recognized as integer variables. Doubles, or floating point numbers. Doubles are numbers that include a decimal point, meaning they can represent fractional values. Examples include 49.1, 3.1159, or 12.5. Doubles are often used in scenarios where you need more precision. For example, when dealing with money, scientific measurements, or percentages. A simple example might be price, $49.99, PI, 314159. Here, price and PI are both floating point numbers, also known as doubles in PHP. Booleans. Boolean values are one of the simplest yet most powerful data types in PHP. They represent only 2 possible states, true or false. These are especially important in conditions, comparisons, and control statements such as if, else, or while loops. For instance, is active 1, true. Is complete at false. In this example, is active holds a true value and is complete holds a false value. PHP interprets these Boolean values to decide whether a block of code should execute or not. For example, if is active, echo, the system is running. Since is active is true, the message will be displayed. Conceptual understanding. Each of these data types, integers, doubles, and Booleans, plays a unique role in programming logic. Integers handle counting and whole number operations. Doubles manage calculations that require decimal precision. Booleans control logical flow and decision-making in your code. Understanding when and how to use these types helps developers write efficient, readable, and error-free PHP programs. As we move forward, we'll explore more data types such as strings, arrays, and objects, which bring even more flexibility to PHP. Now that we've discussed integers, doubles, and Booleans, let's explore the remaining PHP variable types that make the language flexible and powerful. NULL. Strings, arrays, and objects. NULL. The null data type is a special type that represents the absence of any value. It can hold only one possible value, null itself. When a variable is assigned null, it means that it doesn't contain any data, or that the data it used to hold has been intentionally cleared. For example, student name. Null. In this case, student name exists, but it doesn't hold any value. You might use null to reset a variable or to represent an empty state in a program before new data is assigned to it. It's important to note that null is different from zero, an empty string, or the Boolean false. These are actual values, whereas null means no value at all. Strings are sequences of characters, and they're used to store text in PHP. For example, a string can be a single word, a sentence, or even a paragraph enclosed in quotes. You can use either single quotes a or double quotes a to define a string. For example, greeting a, hello world, name Nashors, Huzaifa. Both are valid strings in PHP. PHP supports a wide range of string operations, such as concatenation, measuring length, converting to uppercase or lowercase, and extracting substrings. Strings are essential in almost every PHP program because they allow you to handle user input, display messages, and store textual data. Arrays are one of the most powerful data types in PHP. They allow you to store multiple values in a single variable. Each value in an array is assigned a unique index, which can be either numeric or associative, meaning a name or key instead of a number. For example, numbers, array 10, 20, 30, person, bombed array name, right Ali, age, 25, city, Lahore. In the first example, numbers is a numeric array, while person is an associative array. Arrays help group related data together. For instance, storing multiple test scores, product names, or user profiles in a single variable. Arrays are extremely useful when working with loops, databases, or APIs, as they allow developers to manage and organize large amounts of information efficiently. Objects represent a more advanced data type in PHP. They are instances of programmer-defined classes, which are blueprints for creating structured data models. Objects can contain both variables, known as properties, and functions, known as methods, that belong to a specific class. For example, class car, a public brand, public color. Function set details, brand color, this brand brand, this color bool color, function get details, return, brand, this brand, color, this color. A car one down surrenders new car. Car one set details, Toyota, black. Echo car one, get details. In this example, the car class defines a structure, and car one becomes an object of that class. Objects allow developers to package both data and behavior together, making code easier to maintain and reuse, a key principle in object-oriented programming. Summary. PHP supports a variety of variable types, each serving a specific purpose. Integers for whole numbers, doubles for decimal numbers, Booleans for true or false values, null for representing no value, strings for text and characters, arrays for collections of multiple values, objects for structured, class-based data. Each of these types contributes to making PHP a flexible and powerful scripting language, capable of handling everything from simple data operations to complex web applications. The final data type in PHP is called a resource. A resource is a special kind of variable that holds a reference to an external resource outside of PHP's own memory. Unlike integers or strings, resources don't actually contain the data themselves. They act as links or pointers to something external that PHP interacts with. A common example of a resource is a database connection. When you connect PHP to a database such as MySQL using a command like mysql-connect, PHP creates a resource variable that stores the connection handle. This handle isn't a number or a string. It's a special reference that allows PHP to communicate with that external system. For example, connection or miscli connect, localhost, root, students. Here, connection is not a regular variable. It's a resource variable that holds a reference to the connection between PHP and the database. Other examples of resources include file handles from fopen, curl sessions used for sending data to APIs, or image manipulation contexts from the GD library. These resources are managed internally by PHP, and they are automatically released when the script ends or when you explicitly close them. The key takeaway is that resources act as a bridge between PHP and the outside world, allowing your PHP script to interact with files, databases, or network connections efficiently. Simple versus compound data types. Now that we've covered all the variable types in PHP, it's important to understand how they are classified internally. Among the 8 data types, the first 5, integers, doubles, booleans, null, and strings, are known as simple types. These types hold single standalone values. For example, a string like hello, a number like 42, or a Boolean value like true are all simple because they represent one individual piece of data. On the other hand, arrays and objects are known as compound types. This means they can hold multiple values or even combinations of different types inside them. For example, student was array, name, wa Ali, age, wa 21, grade, wa A. Here, the student array holds a string, an integer, and another string, so all together in a single variable. Similarly, an object can contain both properties and functions packaged together, allowing developers to build complex real-world models within code. Compound types are extremely powerful because they let you organize and manipulate large sets of data easily. You can think of them as containers that can store various types of values, whether numbers, strings, or even other arrays. Understanding PHP variable types, to summarize this entire topic, PHP supports 8 main data types used to define the nature of data stored in variables: integer, whole numbers, double, decimal numbers, or floating point values; Boolean, true or false values; null, represents no value or an empty state; string, textual data enclosed in quotes; array, collection of multiple values under one name; object, instance of a class that can hold both data and functions; resource, special references to external data sources like databases or files together. These data types form the foundation of PHP programming. By understanding them deeply, developers can control how data is stored, processed, and transferred between parts of a web application, making their code more structured, efficient, and reliable. Now let's take a deeper look at integers, one of the most commonly used data types in PHP. An integer is a number that does not contain any fractional or decimal part. In simpler terms, integers are whole numbers. They can be positive, negative, or 0. Examples include numbers like 256, 10358, or 179567. Whenever you need to represent whole number quantities, such as counting items, setting a user's age, or looping through iterations, the integer type is the best choice. How PHP defines an integer in PHP. An integer is defined as a non-decimal number that can either be written in decimal, base 10, hexadecimal, base 16, or even octal, base 8 format. However, in most cases, you'll be working with regular decimal numbers. For example, age 25, temperature, or 5, score, your 10358. All these variables hold integer values because they don't include any decimal portion. Integer range and system architecture. The range of integers that PHP can handle depends on the system's architecture, whether it's a 32-bit or a 64-bit system. This range determines the smallest and largest numbers that can be represented as integers in memory. For 32-bit systems on a 32-bit system, The range of integers goes from 2047, 483, 648 to 147, 483, 647. This means that any number outside of this range cannot be represented as an integer and will automatically be converted to a floating point number. For example, if you try to assign a number larger than 2047, 483, 647, PHP will treat it as a float to prevent overflow errors. For 64-bit systems on modern 64-bit systems, PHP supports a much wider range for integers. The valid range is 9,023, 372,036, 854,775, 808 to 9,023, 372,036, 854,775, 807. This allows developers to handle very large numbers, such as database record IDs, timestamps, or even big mathematical computations without losing precision. Automatic conversion. Type juggling.php is a loosely typed language, which means it automatically converts between data types when needed. If you perform an operation that involves both integers and floats, PHP will automatically juggle the integer into a float. For instance, result, juct 10 plus 5.5. Result becomes 15.5, a float even though 10 is an integer. PHP converts it temporarily to a float to perform the calculation accurately. Practical. Importance: understanding how integers work and their range limits helps prevent logical or overflow errors in your code, especially when dealing with calculations, loops, or database operations. For most everyday applications, PHP's integer precision is more than sufficient. However, for extremely large values, like financial systems or cryptography, developers often use BCMath or GMP libraries for handling arbitrary precision numbers. Integers are whole numbers without decimals. They can be positive, negative, or zero. On 32-bit systems, the range is from 2.1 billion to 2.1 billion. On 64-bit systems, the range expands up to 9.2 quintillion in both directions. PHP automatically converts integers to floats if the value exceeds the system's limit. Understanding this helps developers manage numerical data accurately, optimize performance, and write reliable PHP programs across different system environments. In PHP, integers have a defined size limit depending on your system architecture, as we discussed earlier. Once this limit is exceeded, meaning the number becomes larger or smaller than what PHP can represent as an integer, PHP automatically converts the value into a floating point number, or simply, a float. This automatic conversion ensures that your program doesn't crash or throw an overflow error. Instead, PHP seamlessly switches to a type that can handle larger or more precise numbers. For example, if you're performing a calculation and one of the numbers is a float, the entire result will also be treated as a float. Let's look at this example. Result, nanash 4, 2.5. Even though 4 is an integer, 2.5 is a float. The result 10.0 will be stored as a float because one of the operands, 2.5, is a floating point value. This process of automatic conversion between data types is known as type juggling in PHP. And it's one of the reasons. PHP is considered a flexible and beginner-friendly language. Rules for integers in PHP. PHP has a few basic rules that define how integers must be written and used. Understanding these rules will help you avoid syntax or logic errors in your programs. There must be at least one digit in an integer. Every integer value must include at least one numeric digit. For example, int var 89. Here, int var is a valid integer variable holding the value 89. Integers must not contain decimal points. An integer cannot have a fractional or decimal component. For instance, int var 11 87654. This is valid. However, int var 1 or 87.654 would make it a float, not an integer. Integers can be either positive or negative. PHP supports both positive and negative integer values. For example, another int, dars 1245 plus 134. This expression uses both negative and positive integers in a simple arithmetic operation. Integers can be defined in different numeral systems. PHP supports integers in 3 different formats: octal, base 8, prefixed with a 00. Example, octal num Faro 123, equivalent to decimal 83 decimal, base 10, the standard format without any prefix. Example, decimal num, 34, hexadecimal, base 16, prefixed with 0x. Example, hex num, shaxarax 1a, equivalent to decimal 26. These formats allow developers to work with different numeric systems, especially useful in low-level programming. Color coding, like web hex colors, or when dealing with data conversions. Conceptual understanding to summarize, integers in PHP are simple yet powerful for handling whole numbers. However, whenever the range exceeds the system's integer capacity or involves a decimal operation, PHP intelligently converts the result into a float. This built-in flexibility ensures smooth mathematical calculations and reduces the risk of overflow errors. By following these rules and understanding how integers behave, you can write cleaner, error-free PHP code that works consistently across both 32-bit and 64-bit systems. Now that we've covered what integers are, their ranges, and how they behave, let's move on to how PHP allows you to check whether a variable is an integer. In PHP, there are built-in functions that let you verify the data type of a variable. These functions are extremely useful when writing programs that require type validation. For example, when you want to make sure a user's input is a number before performing calculations. Functions for checking integer. Type. There are three main functions in PHP that are used to check if a variable contains an integer value. IsInt, isLong, alias of isInt, isInteger, alias of isInt. Even though there are three different names, all of them perform the same function. They check whether the given variable is of the integer data type and return a Boolean value. True if the variable is an integer, false if it is not. Example, using isInt. Let's look at a simple example to understand how this works. num1 is 100. num2 den 5. num3 is doing 20. Var dump is int and num1. Output bool, true. Var dump is int num2. Output, bool, false. Var dump is int, num3. Output, bool, false. In this example, num1 is an integer, so isInt returns true. Num2 is a float because it contains a decimal, so it returns false. A num3 is a string even though it looks like a number, so it also returns false. This shows how PHP strictly checks the data type, not just the value, using aliases, isLong, and isInteger. Both isLong and isInteger are simply alternative names or aliases for isInt. They behave exactly the same way. For example, value was 45. If isLong value. Echo. The variable is an integer. Here, even though we used isLong, PHP treats it identically to isInt and confirms that value is an integer. The same applies to if isInteger value. Echo, the variable is an integer. These functions are especially helpful when validating user input or working with data from external sources like databases or forms. For example, before performing arithmetic operations or storing values in numeric fields, you can check that the variable is indeed an integer. This helps prevent unexpected type errors or calculation issues in your program. PHP provides three equivalent functions to check if a variable is an integer: isInt, isLong, and isInteger. All three return true if the variable holds an integer and false otherwise. These functions are critical for input validation, data verification, and debugging. In practice, most developers prefer using isInt because it's short, clear, and commonly recognized in the PHP community. Now, let's take a look at Code Snippet 5, which demonstrates how PHP's built-in functions can be used to check whether a variable holds an integer value. In this example, we are using the function isInt, which returns true if the variable contains an integer and false otherwise. To clearly see this result, the code uses the var dump function, which displays both the data type and the actual value returned by the condition. Line-by-line explanation. First line of the code defines a variable $1 and assigns it the value 1024 $1 1024. Since 1024 is a whole number with no decimal point, it is an integer. Next, the line var dump is int x1 calls the isInt function to check whether $1 is an integer. The result is printed using var dump, which outputs bool true. This confirms that $1 is indeed an integer. After that, the line echo. The given number $1 is an integer. Prints a message to the browser. The given number 1024 is an integer. Second check. The next part of the code tests a different variable, $2 9384. Here, $2 is assigned a value that includes a decimal point, making it a floating point number, also known as a double. When we run, var dump is int x2. The result will be bool false, because $2 is not an integer. The next echo statement, echo, the given number, $2 is an integer, still prints the message, but remember, the logical check already told us that $2 is not an integer. It's a float. This distinction is crucial when validating numeric data in your programs. Third check. Finally, the code defines another variable, y Fosters 6987. This value, like $1, is a whole number. Therefore, it qualifies as an integer. Running var dump is int y. Produces bool true, confirming that y is indeed an integer. The output message then prints, the given number 6987 is an integer. Complete output. Explanation. When this program runs, the output will look something like this in the browser or console, bool true. The given number 1024 is an integer bool false. The given number 93.84 is an integer bool true. The given number 6987 is an integer here. The first and third results return true because both values are integers, while the second result returns false because the value 93.84 is a floating point number. Conceptual understandings. Example perfectly demonstrates how PHP distinguishes between integers and floating point numbers, even if both contain numeric values. Using functions like isInt ensures that your program correctly identifies data types before performing arithmetic, operations, or storing values in a database. This type-checking approach helps avoid errors and ensures that your code behaves as expected, especially in situations where strict numeric validation is required, such as form inputs, user data, or financial calculations. isInt checks whether a variable holds an integer value. It returns true for integers and false for non-integer values. Is_long and isInteger are simply aliases of isInt. Var dump is used to display both the data type and the result of the check. This combination of functions gives PHP developers a reliable way to verify numeric data before using it in logical or mathematical operations. Now that we've seen the code, let's go through the output step by step to understand exactly what's happening. When the code runs, the screen displays bool true. The given number 1024 is an integer bool false. The given number 99.84 is an integer bool true. The given number 6987 is an integer. Let's break this down in detail. First output, bool true. The first variable, $1, is assigned the value 1024. Since this value is a whole number without any decimal point, PHP recognizes it as an integer. When we use the isInt function to check $1, it returns true. The var dump function then displays the result as bool true here. The term bool refers to the Boolean data type, and true indicates that the condition is satisfied, meaning $1 is indeed an integer. After that, the echo statement prints, the given number 1024 is an integer. Second output, bool false. The next variable $2 is given the value 99.84, which includes a decimal point. This makes $2 a floating point number, float, not an integer. When PHP checks it using isIntX2, it finds that the type does not match. So it returns false. rdump displays this as bool false. This means $2 is not an integer, even though the program still prints the message. The given number, 9984, is an integer. The Boolean result, false, clearly tells us that it isn't. This example is important because it demonstrates that PHP distinguishes between integers and floats. Even if the number appears numeric, its type still matters. Third output, bool true. Finally, the variable $y is set to 6987, which is once again a whole number. When PHP runs the isInt check on y, it identifies it as an integer and returns true. The var dump result appears as bool true, and the echo line prints. The given number 6987 is an integer. How PHP processes. These checks, here's what happens step by step. Asint checks if the variable's data type is integer. Returns true if it is, false if not. Var dump outputs both the data type and the result, true or false. Echo prints the explanatory message to make the output more human-readable. So, in the example, we see that PHP can clearly differentiate between an integer, like 1024 or 6987, and a floating point number, like 99.84, even though both are numeric in nature. The function isInt, and its aliases isInteger and isLong, checks whether a variable is of integer type. Var dump helps visualize the exact result and data type in the output. PHP makes a strict distinction between integers and floats, which helps prevent logical errors in calculations or data processing. The Boolean results, true and false, reflect the accuracy of type checking, essential for reliable and type-safe PHP programming. Code Snippet 5 demonstrates a fundamental concept in PHP. Even though all numeric values may look similar, their data types define how PHP treats them in operations and validations. This makes understanding and checking variable types a crucial part of writing stable, bug-free PHP code. After understanding integers, the next important numeric data type in PHP is the double, also known as a floating point number. A double is a number that contains a decimal point, which means it can represent both whole and fractional values. This makes it extremely useful for mathematical operations that require precision, such as dealing with money, measurements, or scientific calculations. By default, PHP prints double values using the minimum number of decimal places needed to accurately represent the value. For example, a number like 3.14159 will display exactly as 3.14159, while a shorter number like 49.1 will simply appear as 49.1 without adding unnecessary zeros after the decimal point. Understanding Code Snippet 6. Let's go through the provided example step by step. In this program, we first define two variables, pi, 3.14159, price star 49.1. Here, pi holds the value 3.14159, which represents the mathematical constant pi, while price holds 49.1, representing a monetary value. Both of these variables are doubles because they contain decimal points. Next, we print their values using the echo statement. Echo value of pi, echo price. The output will appear as value of pi, 3.1159 price, 49.1. This shows that PHP automatically determines how many digits to display. It doesn't pad the number with extra zeros unless specified. In other words, doubles are printed in their most efficient, human-readable form by default. How doubles work. Internally, doubles in PHP are stored using floating point representation, which means the value is divided into two. Parts are the mantissa, the significant digits, and an exponent, which defines the position of the decimal point. This allows PHP to handle a wide range of numeric values, from very small decimals like 0.0001 to extremely large numbers such as 1.7E308. However, because floating point numbers rely on binary representation, they are not always perfectly precise. Tiny rounding errors can occur due to how numbers are stored in memory. For example, val rot 0.1 plus 0.2, echo val. The output might display something like 0.30004. This isn't a bug. It's a natural limitation of floating point, arithmetic that exists in nearly every programming language. Not just PHP. Key characteristics of doubles in PHP contain decimal points. Doubles represent fractional numbers like 3.5, 0.25, or 1275. Stored as floating point values, they use binary scientific notation for efficient storage. Precision limit, typically accurate up to 14 decimal digits depending on your system. Automatic conversion. When an operation involves both an integer and a float, PHP automatically converts the result to a float to preserve precision. Example: result 4, 2.5. Output 10.0. Float. Doubles are commonly used in financial calculations, like prices, tax rates, or discounts. Mathematical formulas, like calculating area, volume, or percentages. Measurement and scientific data where fractions are unavoidable. For example, radius. 5.5. Ada area, dar 3/1059. Radius. Echo area of circle, area. This program will correctly calculate and print the area of a circle using floating point arithmetic. Doubles in PHP represent numbers that include a decimal point. They print using the minimum necessary number of decimal places by default. PHP automatically converts integers to doubles when precision is needed. While doubles are powerful, they can introduce minor rounding errors, something to be aware of in financial or scientific applications. By mastering doubles, you can perform accurate calculations and handle real-world numeric data effectively in PHP. And that wraps up our detailed explanation of PHP variable types. In this video, we explored everything from integers and floating point numbers, doubles, to Booleans, strings, arrays, objects, and resources. We learned how PHP handles each data type differently, how to check variable types using built-in functions like int, and how numbers are displayed or converted automatically depending on their format. By mastering these fundamentals, you've built a solid foundation for understanding how PHP stores, processes, and manipulates data, one of the most essential skills in programming. If you've been following along, you now know how integers and doubles behave in PHP, how type checking works with functions like isInt, and how PHP automatically converts between data types when necessary, and why understanding data types is key to writing bug-free and efficient code. Remember, variables are the backbone of every program, and understanding their types is the first step toward becoming a professional PHP developer. Thanks for watching Huzaifa TV Official. Stay informed, stay inspired, and become part of the Huzaifa TV Official family. Don't forget to like the video, comment your thoughts or questions below, share this video with others learning PHP, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss an update. Keep learning, keep coding, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. This is Huzaifa TV Official signing off.